Okay, I've got a message from Chris. How you doing, Chris? He says, hey, Bruce, I hope all is going well. Hope you're doing well. I also like to go on the record having stated how valuable the courses are. Man, thanks a lot. I appreciate that. He says, I know you have stated multiple times that the ISSO role is to work with the SME, yes, not to be the regulation interpreter as well as the control implementer. Having said that, sometimes we find ourselves in multiple role positions. See, this is a man who's really in the field. And what do you recommend is the best source for achieving controls? Okay, let's answer the first question right here, because this is a really important one. So Chris is talking about, hey, you shouldn't be all things at once to all people. But sometimes when you get in these organizations, especially small or medium organizations who don't have enough expertise, they'll have you wearing several hats. And sometimes those hats have a conflict of interest. What I mean to say is you're supposed to have something called separation of duties for certain roles. For example, the ISSO is not really supposed to be the same person who's the system administrator, but a lot of times in organizations, this is exactly what they do, because they do what they can with what they have. And all that means is that at some point, the organization, some auditor, some assessor somewhere, when they come to your organization, they're going to see that. And it's just a matter of time before they mark that down as, hey, you need to have separation of duties. And then you'll say, well, what do you mean? And your organization they're going to tell your organization, hey, you've got the security, the guy who's supposed to be looking at the security logs is the same person who controls the implementation of the system. So what that person can do is they could actually hack the system. Not saying that they would, but somebody could go in there and hack the system and then cover their tracks. They can go into the back end of the logs and to delete them, because they have the rights to do that. So if you get yourself in that situation, if you happen to be in an organization that has dual-hatted and you're doing the system security administration for that server or that system, and you're the person monitoring the logs and making sure the logs have, proper protection, one thing you can do, and one thing your organization can do, and I've seen done before, a common practice, best security practice, is to separate the accounts. Like, in other words, you have one account, and it's kind of a ghetto thing to do. It's not like there's ways around this, but but the least you can do is have at least two accounts. Like, one account is just a system administrator, and all that account does is implement controls. Implement controls, make sure the system works properly. And then you have another separate account, and that's maybe an ISSO account. And that ISSO account, that ISSO account doesn't necessarily have admin rights. It's just a normal standard account. Maybe they have access to the logs or something, but they have a limited system administrator privileges, right? And that way you have one account that's being tracked, via Active Directory or whatever system you have in place. And you have the other account being tracked whenever they create user accounts or whenever they access privileged files or whatever. But you have a running account and logs on what each account is doing. That way, if something happens, you'd be able to say, okay, this account at this time frame was doing this, and this account at this time frame was doing that. So you could have two separate accounts that are doing or have a role in two separate things, but you're the person that's doing them. That's one thing you could do. I've seen organizations do like a logbook, and whenever they log into, that's a real old school, but that's one thing I've seen. You want to have some way of tracking what you're doing on each one of those roles. You know what I mean? So that's one thing that I've seen done before. There's ways around that, but really anything could be. Ideally, what you want is a separate person with a separate account doing a separate role. That way there's complete separation of duty. And another thing you could do is if you know that there's no separation of duty for these two roles that have a conflict of interest, you could just annotate it and say, we know, our organization knows that this is a conflict. We have a lack of separation of duties, but we have a plan of action going forward to fix this. Once we hire this person, once we create this role, that's just a couple things that you can do for separation of duties that I've seen done in the past. Okay.